Okay, so what can possibly happen when three legendary brands from the imaging world come together to form an alliance? And what happens if two of them have 100-year-old history behind them, and the third, not though as old, but has been doing fantastically well in the imaging world? Well, I'm talking about the companies like Leica, Panasonic, and Sigma. Well, they recently came together to form an alliance called the L Alliance. Leica is the original inventor of the mirrorless cameras. Their rangefinder cameras are truly mirrorless. I mean, they've been in use for many, many decades. Though it was Epson, I think it was RD1, which was the first mirrorless camera in the digital world, it was Lumix which really made it popular. Their Micro Four Thirds format is even now is one of the most popular mirrorless cameras which are available. Sigma Corporation has been making lenses for almost all camera brands, and they are truly at the top of their game. Though these three manufacturers are going to be making products independently, these products will be interchangeable, which means the bodies can be changed and the lens can be changed and all that. So the advantage to the photographer is very obvious there. And in this video, we're going to take a look at the first product from this alliance. The Lumix S1 and the S1R from Panasonic. This one is the pre-production model of S1, the 24 megapixel version. So thank you, Panasonic, for sending it to us. So the first impression, it's built like a tank, which means that it is built to last. It's big and it's heavy, which is exactly opposite of what we know mirrorless for. It's made of magnesium alloy, like many other cameras, and weather resistant, can stand splashes, sprays, all that, and can work even up to minus 10 degrees Celsius, which is amazing. Mirrorless cameras are usually small in size and they are light, but though it is liked by many, there are lots of people who also don't exactly like it because they are from, let's say, from the DSLR world. I am also from the same vintage. So I don't have any problem with the size. In fact, I don't even know why mirrorless got to be small to begin with, because there was no problem with the size of, let's say, any DSLR cameras, according to me. The grip is fantastic. Great feeling holding this camera. All the dials and switches are exactly where it is supposed to be. I don't see any switches or dials out of place. The on-off lever is right on top. Flick it to the left and the camera comes alive instantly. The readout dial, it's an LCD which is right on top, and it also is illuminated. The mode function is physical switch. It also has a lock so that you don't accidentally switch the modes. The grip is also very nice. So coming around to the back side, the LCD monitor is tiltable in three ways. Okay, this is downwards, upwards, and if you are used to shooting portrait mode using the rear LCD, you can tilt the LCD in that direction too. I am a little old-fashioned, so I use the traditional way of looking through the viewfinder. That takes me to the EVF. Panasonic claims that this has the highest specs as on today for any EVF. 5.7 million pixels with a 120 Hertz refresh rate, which actually makes it top of the game, at least as on now. It also has features like focus peaking indicators in the viewfinder, and also zebra, which will indicate overexposure in the EVF. Along with all the other required markings are available in the EVF. Panasonic has been listening to the photographer. That's what I think, because they've given two memory card slots in it, an XQD and SD. They also have built in a safety mechanism to the door. And if you happen to pull out the memory card while it is being written, you run the risk of spoiling the card. To prevent that kind of accidental damage, Panasonic has built in a very interesting safety mechanism to it. While the data is being written, you will see a red light blinking, and if you try to open, it will also sound an alarm for you. And I also see electronic contacts at the bottom of the camera, which means that there is a battery pack coming. Now, the sensor. Panasonic has designed and created the sensor for this S1 and S1R, which means you can really look forward to some amazing video quality along with the still images. Panasonic has built in a very interesting feature in this camera called the high resolution photography. They take 4 shots by shifting 1 pixel and they combine it together and give you one raw image of 96 megapixel and 187 megapixel respectively. There are few restrictions, the few things that the photographer needs to be aware of while doing the high resolution photography is that the camera got to be on a tripod. Then your scene has to be absolutely still. It either has to be an inanimate product in front of you, or a building where there are no movements, or a scenery where there is very little or no wind. If there is a movement in your scene, it will show up as an artifact or a visual disturbance in your final image, which is probably not desired. In continuous high mode, you can shoot up to 9 frames, and continuous low, you can shoot up to about 4 frames, which is pretty good for a full frame mirrorless camera. And the shutter is rated for about 400,000 cycles. With regard to the video, which is one of the most interesting feature of the S1, is that it can shoot 60p in 4K internally. Now, when you shoot internally, it is 8-bit 420, and externally, it will be 422 at full 10-bit, which is amazing. Probably the first among the mirrorless cameras. And interestingly, it also has a full-size HDMI port, which will, get the video out from the camera. There are microphones and headphone jacks, and there is a USB 3, which is for charging, and I am sure it is also for tethering. This also has a feature which I have not seen in many cameras. It's got a lock function. What it does is, once you set the camera, and if you're ready to shoot, and if you want to stay in that setup and you don't want to shift anything, even accidentally, you just lock the camera. Once locked, no other function other than the trigger will function in this camera, which I think is very interesting. Now the menu. There are 2 ways to get into the menu. One is the quick access menu, which is the Q button. You can access picture style, white balance mode, ISO mode, and fine-tune your picture styles, the speed, format, proportions, etc. And if you want to go to the detailed menu, press menu and you straight away enter the camera menu. This probably is not one of the finest menus that I have seen, and also the wheel, the toggle wheel is also a little tacky, probably because it's a pre-production model. I'm sure it's going to improve as they, get close to the final product. In the first menu, you can set your style, metering mode, etc. The second one will give you a whole lot of settings. It's self-explanatory. I don't see any reason why I should go into each one and explain in detail. There is a separate video mode. You can select your film resolution, your speed, sound levels, everything can be adjusted in the menu. Then of course you have a setting menu. Well, everything and you can also of course create your custom settings and save in different banks. And yep, other than that, everything is done. Now the lens. Panasonic has announced 3 lenses to begin with. a 51.4, a 24-105 f4, and a 7200 f4 again, all with optical image stabilization built in. Because of the extra size of the L mount, I forgot to mention that. So this is the L mount that we are talking about, which is originally designed by Leica. And now all these three L Alliance partners will use this. The advantages are that it's got these 4 lock mechanism, which locks the lens firmly in position, one. Second, because of its extremely wide opening, it's about 51.6 mm, which is the widest among all mirrorless cameras, allows the lens designer to make extremely fast lenses. The short flange distance enable the camera to focus very close to the subject too. Now the most important feature of this camera, which everyone is talking about in the internet world, is about the autofocus. This camera uses a technique called depth from defocus, which is different from face detection and dual pixel and etc. etc. Now, each one has its own advantages and disadvantages. If you have dual pixel sensor, it technically affects the image quality. Okay, so says the expert. Whereas depth from defocus, though suffers from the speed in focus, it will assure you a much greater quality. Combined with great processing power of the CPU, the processor within, the built-in AI and all those techniques that the camera keeps learning from the way you're shooting, this one can offer, once it is completely ready to ship, a great quality focusing tube. So at this point, focus tracking, face detection and face tracking all can be a little shaky, which is what the entire fraternity is reporting. But let's take it out for a shoot. Let's shoot some still images. Let's shoot some video. Come back and take a look at it. And like they say, proof of the pudding is in eating. But still, we don't have the entire pudding ready. But whatever that is available with us, let's put it to a small test. The S1 is mounted on the Mosa Air 2. Camera is tracking the focus perfectly well, and here you can see the auto ISO getting adjusted very cleanly. Low light, auto ISO is working perfectly well. This one is a handheld shot, and the image stabilization is activated too. The 24-105 is an excellent macro lens too. Now this is shot at 105 and at minimum distance, and at 60 fps. Though we mentioned that we will not worry too much about the follow focus, I think we should take a look at that too. really anxious about this because it needs to be fixed, and I'm sure it's going to be fixed before it is released in April. Though the follow focus and face identification and tracking and all was a little shaky, what we are really excited about is the lack of noise in shadows even at very high ISO, and the way it reproduced the colors exactly even at very high ISO. So this footage was shot at 2000 ISO, okay, and flat profile. When we zoom into the dark areas, we don't see any grains at all, and recovery is eminently possible because we shot in flat and we can work with the colors and see how clearly the color chart is reproduced. Now let's quickly look at the still images. We shot all JPEGs because though it can shoot RAW, no popularly non-RAW converters understand the Lumix RAW at this point. So what you're looking at is fine JPEG. The first thing is the image stabilization, the dual image stabilization that is available. One in the camera, one optically in the lens. Okay, so if you look at the metadata here, I've shot this image at 43 mm, f4 and 1/4 of a second and handheld, and you saw how we were shooting, and ISO is 100. Now let me zoom in and show you the image. You can see a small shake in the image, which means you also need to be really steady when you take that shot. So having dual image stabilization is not a 100% guarantee that you're going to get clear, crisp pictures even at low shutter speeds. But I'm being a little more careful while shooting, and at 1/4 of a second, f4, 43 mm, this is what you can get. But in terms of color, this image is not exactly what I would have liked to have, because I can see a play of a lot of unwanted colors bouncing from all around the, the wall and the window and all that. So the white balance is probably not exactly correct in this case. We shot in auto white balance condition. Now this is the next one. It is 1/5 of a second. Okay, crisp, tack sharp. This one is 1/4 of a second, and I think I also got one which is 1/3. This one is 1/3 of a second. Now look at how sharp the image is. This camera definitely is going to be a brilliant camera for wedding photographers, because they work in tricky lighting conditions. They work in low light conditions and they want crisp, clear, sharp images. So with a little bit of practice, they can get good quality, sharp images. Take a look at this image. Okay, it's tack sharp here. See the bokeh. It's nice circular bokeh in the backdrop, which I'm very happy about. There is another image which we shot outdoors, which I'd like to show it to you for the bokeh. So this is shot at f4 at 1/50th of a second, and see the way the foreground has gone out of focus. There's tons of details on what she's wearing, and face is brilliantly sharp. Okay, and look at the way the background bokeh is forming. There's one more image that I'd like to show you to demonstrate the bokeh. See the details on the skin. What's the exposure like? It's f4, 1/60th of a second at 400 ISO. So I'm extremely happy about the way the lens is behaving, and this lens also has a built-in macro feature. So the macro will work best when the lens is at its longest end, which is 105. So you can see how close I am. I think this is the minimum distance that I can go to. Yeah, there I am. Okay. So this is how sharp. Now the S1 is supposed to have a very good high ISO performance. So we tried to test that too. Now this one is shot at 100 ISO. It's a JPEG, but it's shot at 100 ISO. So this is how clear it is. Okay. Now let me go to the next one, which is at 800, because 200 and 400 is definitely going to be sharp. I jumped straight to 800. So look at how clean the image is even at 800. Okay. Actually, there is not much difference between the 100 and the 800. Now moving on, one stop increased. Now we are at 1600, and still I don't see too much of difference. Let me double it. One more stop. So this is 3200, clean. Let's look at what is happening in the shadow area in comparison to, let's go back to, this is the 1600. This is the 3200. Actually, there is not much of a difference even at 3200. Now we are at 6400. Okay, still I can't see too much of difference. Mind you, this is a JPEG that you're looking at, so the RAW is going to be way superior. The next one is 12,800. Still crisp, clear, sharp, and of course the shadow is going to go softer and softer, but you can't see artifacts, you can't see noise. I can't see noise or grains there at all. Next is 25,600. So that is when probably you start seeing some bit of noise in the backdrop, and these images becoming softer. Yeah, so the details on her dress is gone in comparison to the previous one, because this had some detail, but now the detail on the dress is gone, but the face is crisp and clear. I'm going to push it to the high range, which is not advisable to go, because nobody, even the camera manufacturer, don't recommend that you go to the low or the high regions of the ISO scale. But it's there for you to use if it's the case of life and death. But yeah, so this is 51,200. But I would say it's still a usable image. JPEG again. But you can see some grains, but these grains are not ugly grains. You know, they have some film quality in it, in this grains. If you look at it carefully, these grains are very acceptable grains. But you will lose details because, you know, they are digitally softening the image, but it's an acceptable image. Now this one is 2,04,800 ISO. Well, tons of grains. Now you can actually see color grains. Not usable at all unless you want to use this as some kind of special effect. So I would say everything from 100 ISO to 51,200 ISO is usable. I would stop at something like 6,400, and if push come to shove, I would go to 12,800. But I don't think a wedding photographer will require anything more than a 12,800. Here, perfect. I don't see any problem at all. Now, to make this a success, besides all these features, I think what Panasonic has to do is to price it well for a very price-sensitive Indian market. In Indian mythology, there is the story of Shiva and Vishnu coming together to create a force which fights the evil and defeats the evil eventually. So here I see a triumvirate, 3 different forces coming together to form one alliance to fight the mirrorless war. Bye for now.